Welcome to the New Year and the Urban Agenda. I'm David R. Jones, President of the Community Service Society of New York, and your host. Under the federal welfare reform law taking effect in 1997, power to care for the poor shifts directly to the states. New York's legislature faces some tough decisions as it debates a plan for the state. How will it shape the workfare program? Will job training and child care be provided? What will it do about those without any skills or hope for employment? Where are the jobs to come from in New York State? Here to help us examine these crucial issues are Queens Assemblyman Jeffrion Aubry, who heads the state Black and Puerto Rican Legislative Caucus, and Liz Krueger, Associate Director of the Community Food Resource Center, an anti-poverty advocacy group. Assemblyman, is the legislature prepared to go along with the governor on his 45% cut and some of his other suggestions? How is this going to work as we come into this legislative year?
The governor is going to propose, as is his job. We will then begin a process of debate. You will see undoubtedly the split between the Senate and the Assembly based on the kinds of proposals that the governor will put forward. We had a preview of this last year in which the governor proposed welfare reform at that time. Many of the same proposals I expect to see on the table. That proposal never did get enacted, and while passed, I believe, in the Senate, was not passed in the Assembly. Now we are faced with federal action that has shifted the power, as you said, to the states to craft programs and craft a welfare plan with requirements that the federal government has placed on them. Some of them I disagree with greatly. Term limits, time limits, that is, on benefits and a whole host of others.
Liz, what do you think? I mean, you've heard the preliminaries from the governor, just giving us sort of a snapshot of what's at risk here.
Well, what's at risk is the future of poor communities in this city and throughout our state. Because if the governor's plan were to go through, we would end up losing billions of dollars over the next 5 years to poor communities throughout the state, money that could not be made up anywhere else. This is the second year the governor's put out, as the Assemblymember mentioned, his plan for welfare. He calls it welfare reform. It is not reform. It is simply cutting off benefits in a cruel way that I don't believe the people of New York want us to do. What I would love to see the legislature take on this year is addressing the real issues we have to face in this state because of federal welfare reform. There is nothing in the governor's plan that calls for job creation. That's what we have to be talking about. There's nothing in the governor's plan that talks at all about how we move people up and out of poverty. I think that government for too long, both Governor Pataki and the federal government, have gotten the assignment wrong. They keep thinking the assignment is to just cut people off of benefits. The real assignment is to move people out of poverty. And what we need in the state is a serious debate and discussion and plan for how we're going to do that.
But isn't it true, I mean, Governor Pataki, I think, insists that there are enough private sector jobs to pick up many of these people, that it's basically this whole welfare structure that's sort of holding back people from actually engaging in serious job hunting. And his tax cuts, he claims, are generating new jobs like crazy.
Unfortunately,
you have two significant problems with his premise. One, of course, is if jobs are created, do the jobs then, and the people who need them, is there a match in skills? Are the jobs that these individuals can obtain and get? Second, of course, is that while we have produced some jobs, we have far more people who are on welfare than we have jobs produced every year. And so there's going to be a dislocation of some of our population who would never be able to fill these jobs.
You know, this is sort of confirmed by a recent discussion I had with one of the larger, if not the largest, business group in New York. I'll leave their name out because I'm quoting them without permission, who said that basically corporate New York, as he knows it, is basically laying people off in unskilled job categories.
That's right.
And I sort of know it. I'm chairman of the board of a small bank, and we're not hiring tellers full-time anymore.
That's right.
Because automation is sweeping those jobs away. When I was a boy growing up in Brooklyn, the teller job was the first step into the middle class for most working poor African Americans of the time.
And of
Liz?
course, the governor's rhetoric doesn't match his own facts, because the State Department of Labor, which is an agency under the rubric auspices of the governor, has recently come out with their analysis for 1997, showing that basically there's a job gap of over 600,000 jobs in New York State. There are over 900,000 people in need of jobs, and only 260, 270,000 jobs available. The math doesn't play out.
Right.
And so unless we address how we're going to create jobs, use government as a stimulus to provide assistance to ensure that there are jobs and target those to where we need the most in poor communities, we're not going to solve this problem.
Yes.
This whole process has been based on some fallacious assumptions and some that we just won't recognize. One is that this is not a full employment economy. The United States, its economic system will not operate if everybody works. There are serious attempts to maintain people not working, I believe, in order so that we hold down inflation, the value of the dollar stays the same. So we then turn around and blame the people who are left out. And this is an attempt, as far as I'm concerned, to pass that blame on those who are least able to defend themselves.
One of the famous political historical figures of New York is a guy named Boss Tweed, said after being attacked by all sorts of progressive and liberal elements, what are you going to do about it? I assume that for progressives and for many in the audience, the question becomes, okay, we have this crisis. How do we engage this? For instance, Assemblyman, how will the Black and Puerto Rican caucus engage in this coming legislative session on this issue?
Well, we believe that some of the basic things have to be put in place that will protect people. You need to keep a safety net. If you accept the fact that not everybody is going to be able to make this marvelous transition into the new economy, then you have to have a protection for them. We don't believe that this society works, or our city will work, or our state will work, if people are thrown out on the streets. If they're losing both employment, homes, the ability to support themselves, that would create instability in our society. So you have to have a safety net that is there and that is real and accepts that. You have to ensure that there is training and education for people so that those who can make these new steps into new jobs have the skills to do that. You have to provide child care, because if you're going to force people into the employment field and they have families, children have to be cared for. And we already have a shortage of child care in this city and this state. So that's going to make a tremendous weight on our social service structure.
I guess the question immediately gets raised, however, that the governor, we hear, is going to propose yet another tax cut. How are we going to come up with the revenues to put all these things back in place?
Well, in the way in which the federal legislation has been written, there will be some additional money brought down this year that will act as sort of a bonus for the state reducing welfare rolls. So there will be some additional money. We have to ensure that it's put to this purpose, to the purpose of helping those who are now undergoing this dramatic change, as opposed to just filling a budget gap. The other, of course, is you have to look at any more tax cuts and say no.
Are we sure that our Assembly leadership is going to say no too?
Well,
I know it's very attractive.
You asked me about the Black and Puerto Rican caucus. You didn't ask me about the Assembly leadership.
Well, you know, I always see the Black and Puerto Rican caucus as part of that leadership,
we are.
Hopefully. And,
no,
but
clearly we are. But we will have the battle within our own conference,
right.
First, about whether or not we can afford to reasonably, once again, attack taxes without increasing revenues. There's already an estimated $3 billion deficit for next year, and then you have these additional requirements from this process. That's going to make things very difficult, and certainly difficult for anybody to rationalize that another cutting taxes is going to boost an economy that's already lagging.
Liz, how do you think this should be approached?
Well, I certainly agree with the Assembly member. We have to fight any proposals for tax cuts. We cannot afford them. We have been doing tax cuts year after year, starting with the Cuomo administration. All of the promises for the economy that were supposed to come true when we cut our taxes have not come true. This trickle-down theory has been proven over and over again not to be a successful model. We need those revenues to provide the services the people of the state of New York have to have. I think it's also critical to realize we were in a major gap scenario for services for poor New Yorkers long before last summer and the federal government passed their welfare reform bill. So it's not just the money coming in from the federal government that we have to address. It's the fact that we already had been sucking dry funding streams that are critical, particularly for our cities in this state. And I would hope that the legislature will also take seriously the cause and effect of cutting monies that we need in our communities. We're already facing a homelessness crisis, unprecedented. We are in a situation where we are rejecting families with children from shelter in this city because we don't have the solutions to affordable housing and adequate income streams throughout communities. If we don't do the right thing this year, the cost for us in future years is so enormous, I don't know that the legislature and the governor will be able to cope. So I see this as a critical year for New York State to make a decision about which path it's going down. If we make the wrong decisions this year, perhaps for the three of us for the rest of our lifetimes, we'll have to be paying for that and dealing with that. So I hope that the legislature knows that they're in for a long and hard fight. We're going to be there with them as best we can. I know your organization is. We can't make mistakes this year.
One of the things, too, is this is more than just advocates for the poor. I think a middle class, a lower middle class, all the segments of our society are going to be impacted by this. One of the things that was not looked at, I do not believe, as this legislation was proposed, was how it impacts certain geographic areas. We know in New York City that there are areas that are traditionally poor, whose income, median income lags behind everyone else's. The housing stock is run down, job opportunities are limited. If you are going to now change the economic structure of those neighborhoods with these new proposals, it would take me back to maybe the 60s when you're going to devastate inner city neighborhoods once again. And without the kind of progressive thinking that will use this may be an opportunity. That's what we're going to battle. Is this going to be an opportunity, or are we going to condemn ourselves to deteriorate our communities once again?
Well, Liz, you were the first one to come up with the idea of really trying to do sort of an economic impact statement on different areas of the city that this bill or these changes in welfare might bring.
Right. Well, last year, in response to the governor's proposals, we attempted, it wasn't our idea, but we attempted to geographically lay out what the dollar loss to specific communities using Assembly and Senate districts would be, trying to show exactly what the Assembly member just said, that in fact, when you take money out of government benefits for low-income people, what you actually do is take enormous amounts of money out of whole communities. So if for years a legislative agenda has been economic development in their neighborhood, and then you take the infrastructure money out, the whole thing is a house of cards that collapses. If you spent years, as many communities in our city have, renovating buildings, improving housing, building new housing, and yet there is no funding stream for continued rent, those buildings collapse. If you work, as our organization has, to bring food stores into low-income neighborhoods, create jobs, help minority business people develop their small food store into a larger food store, and then everyone in the community, or 30–40% of the people in the community, suddenly lose their food money, what happens? It's not just them who have no food, it's those food stores who can't pay their bills, who can't hire people.
It's interesting in this whole engagement. I don't think the private sector, small business owners, really understood the potential downstream impact here on their livelihood. Certainly people who own smaller apartment, multiple dwellings, and or are owner-occupied, and the brownstones that I knew in Brooklyn, don't realize if this thing goes badly, this could be the end for whole neighborhoods.
Well, I don't know that that's entirely true. One, we certainly give credit to what Liz did last year and the documents she brought together. But there are also, for instance, supermarket associations who came and testified at some of those hearings and saying, you know, if you do this, you're going to ruin a good percentage of our business. We had landlord groups come in and say, without, this kind of subsistence, the individuals who we rent to won't be able to maintain and stay in these apartments. So I think there is some recognition that this is in existence. It just needs to, again, be organized. And our leaders need to understand that they're not just punishing poor people and that a bed of nails philosophy is going to make them rise up and become millionaires, but that you are impacting and hurting an economic structure.
It's interesting. My father was one of the first black assemblymen coming out of Brooklyn, and he built his whole political operation that ultimately made him the first African-American assembly person from that district, based upon sort of mom-and-pop stores, homeowners, and interestingly enough, municipal workers, African-American and Latinos, who for the first generation were taking on municipal jobs. One of the interesting things, obviously, is under this new Welfare Reform Act that many municipal workers who are black and Latino are being displaced. There's already been 21,000 let go in the city of New York, disproportionately black and Latino. They've already added on about 36 to 40,000 people working off their grant as web workers, with a projection, I think, of 120,000 by next year.
In order to meet the federal requirements.
There are only 350,000 municipal workers in New York. When we're starting to hear numbers like 120, 200,000 web workers, we may be seeing the end of many black and Latino jobs in poor neighborhoods. Has there been any reaction that you're hearing from the unions in terms of what this is all going to mean? I haven't heard enough, obviously.
I think unions are extremely concerned about what this process is going to mean to their membership and in the replacement of their existing workers. The fact is, a lot of unions are trying to negotiate processes in which a web worker will become a city worker after a certain period of time, so that they will be taken into the normal city workforce. But you have, right now, you have this theory of running against government. The governor ran against government, so his claim to fame is, I'm reducing the size of government. And of course, the city administration, the mayor, I'm reducing the size of government. We have to understand that, for me, for instance, in my family, if it were not government employment, we wouldn't have been able to do and live.
Anything.
And so, given still the recalcitrance we see in the private sector to let in minorities and women and allow them to rise, then you have government saying you can't get in there. The question is, where do you want us to go? And ultimately, we will go to the street.
In this notion of using this incredible negative as a positive, I've started to raise the question, for instance, if we're going to set these kinds of hurdles for poor people to get jobs, isn't it time to reopen a number of issues? For instance, African American and Latino and women workforce participation in the fire department is lagging the nation. Our fire department has only 3% black, Latino, and women and Asian in it, which is ridiculous, worse than any other major city. Isn't this the time now to start raising the question? You can't have it both ways. You can't hammer poor people, who are predominantly minority, and at the same time keep doors shut because of union work rules and other restraints. And I'm wondering if that's the time to start opening it.
I think you do open that battle. I think you go back to residency requirements.
Absolutely, which has been, no one's talked about it.
It makes no sense for us to now put out people in such a position and then not offer them the opportunity to work in the city at the best paying jobs. I mean, that has, since I've been in the legislature, that had been an issue that we've battled. Quite frankly, the counties around the city of New York who benefit from this process fight us very hard, and we have not had an administration that's willing to take that on. Yeah, we've got, this puts us in that incredible time of opportunity, but all of those battles that we've been struggling with will come to a crux under this process.
I couldn't agree more. We've put out a small paper, basically just listing out a series of recommendations we think government could do to try to create jobs for low-income people, and it includes additional points on civil service exams for low-income people on public assistance living in New York City for those government jobs. We propose that when government is contracting out with businesses to do business with the government, that there ought to be some additional requirement for hiring of low-income people into jobs that get created with that government money. We pass bond acts in the state all the time that are primarily for construction and other projects. That means my taxpayer money and your taxpayer money is going to go to build things for the public good. Why shouldn't part of that deal also include hiring low-income people and tying in training for those jobs if, in fact, it's a dual issue of we need jobs and we need education and training for targeted low-income people for those jobs? Why don't we mesh those things? We've made a series of recommendations like that. while I don't think at this table it would be any conflict, sometimes the word affirmative action gets people hysterically lately. We're basically saying we need an affirmative action program for low-income people to move into jobs. Now, the fact of the matter is that most low-income people in our city are Black and Latina, so in fact it is both a affirmative action and a new affirmative action issue. But if we have to deal with the issue, which we do, of what are we going to do to ensure that low-income people can meet their basic needs by opening up opportunities in the labor force for those who can work, then we have to deal with it straight on, going ahead.
Assemblyman, just one, you represent a very diverse constituency in your district,
Yes.
Queens and part of Long Island. What are your constituents talking about when they talk about welfare? What do they want to see out of welfare reform?
Well, you know, there's a variety of discussions, and because my constituency is that diverse, there is a variety. People generally, when they focus in it, are somewhat hold on to this concept that there's somebody out there cheating them of their money.
Right.
All right. I have a lower middle class population, and they're pressured. They're economically pressured. They're saying, I can't meet my bills, and there are other people who are living better than I because they're on a welfare, and I have to work to maintain my, myself. So you have that dichotomy, and quite frankly, this proposal was built on people's fears. Right. They knew that they threw welfare in the middle of people's concern about their ability to keep a job in face of downsizing and corporate restructuring, and the fact that we don't have this security now where I have a job and I'll retire from it. They knew that they were going to have a winner, and they did that. The problem is it doesn't answer those middle-income people's problems. Right. It merely diverts their attention. So now they won't be able to say, well, at least I'm not supporting somebody else having babies, or those lazy people won't work. So there's a lot of feelings. But primarily, if you get to the heart of it, I don't believe that people in my district or anywhere in New York want to see individuals truly hurt. They would like to see people helped up out of difficult situations. They just feel that the system now, they felt that the system was not doing that and was being used. Well, the reality now is we have a chance to make it work, but are we willing to pay for it? See, and that's what I say to them. You can't have what you want unless you're willing to pay. And the concept of taxes is we all pay for the common good. Right. And taking care of people, letting people move up into society and keeping them secure is the common good.
Right.
I think there will be a significant change in the public's eye as some of these negative programs start having their impacts. I mean, for example, you mentioned workfare.
Right.
Unions are coming to the table now going, wait a second, so if everybody's doing all this work for free, our workers aren't getting hired anymore, and their wages are lowered. And so something must be wrong with this picture. And one by one, there are more unions in the city who are coming together and saying, this wasn't really a good idea. When we talked about jobs, we meant jobs with wages attached.
Right. And benefits.
And benefits attached, thank you. As your constituents start to see some of these program impacts roll through, and according to the National Economic Policy Institute, one of the effects of this welfare reform will be a drop in our state of up to 17% on the wages of low-income workers, because when you push more and more people into the competitive stream for fewer and fewer jobs, wages drop. It's one of those economic realities. Some of your constituents will be going, so explain to me again why I'm making 17% less today than I was 2 years ago. And they may also be asking you, well, I thought I liked welfare reform, but my neighbor's children are crying all the time because they have no food, and she's told me that she has no money for rent anymore, and I know she's just a hard-working woman trying to take care of her kids. Government couldn't really have meant to do this. So unfortunately, I think we're going to see some bad times before we start to see some of the shift, but the public is going to wake up and say, they didn't exactly tell us the truth back there in 1996 when they pushed this through.
And ultimately, I think what happens is the next focus has to be, everybody wants to look at what the taxation process is. They will start to look at corporations that we give exemptions to and benefits to, and then begin to say, how is that tied to ensuring that this problem is cared for? And that's where we want to lead.
Well, I know that Comptroller Carl McCall has come up with some proposals around that. Do those have any chance of getting some interest at a state level, of starting to tie some of the tax benefits and other benefits that corporations get for staying in New York, York State, or getting.
Well, he has a
elsewhere.
natural constituency in my group.
Right.
Whether this governor or the Senate who have traditionally supported big business,
Right.
will be able to see that as one of their objectives. I have great question. That is going to be one of the battles. There have been a lot of laws and regulations on the books as the city and the state has given tax breaks to companies to do things, requiring them to go in and hire low-income individuals. But the administrations have always not wanted to monitor that.
Right.
They've always come back because you have an economic development administration who says, that's too much of a trouble, we're just happy they're here and operating. And people have bought that. We don't think that it works under this scenario. When you destabilized as we have this whole structure that has underlined people of poverty trying to support themselves, you're going to have to demand that corporate America now fess up. They want lower taxes, then you have to help us as a part of your right as a citizen of the city and the state to assist us to care for this problem.
It raises a question, of course, that Liz brought up. When I talk to business leadership, they may go along with that, but they're saying that the skill level of many of the people who are presently collecting welfare doesn't meet their requirements. How do we deal with the fact that we have a large body, a child coming out of foster care in New York, already misused and abused by the state because we had the authority over them, basically comes out with, generally comes out without a high school diploma, has no network of friends or family and no skills.
Right.
What happens to that 48,000 or 50,000 that are in foster care? Just taking that, where do they get the skills suddenly they've been deprived of in poor schools and no training?
Well, suddenly nobody gets skills.
Right.
But what you have to do now is, a part of the equation then is to say that we have to go back and do better what we should have been doing all along. We have to do it in the educational system. We have to do it in the job training system. And all of these steps, since you're not going to have a safety net, then now your responsibility is to make sure that those cracks that you created, you fill them up.
Liz, and one closing note?
Well, one closing note, we're sitting in a city university building. There's all kinds of research showing that people going to college, whether it's a year of community college or 4-year degrees, statistically are the people who move up and out into the labor market because those are the skills we need in today's economy. Yet the federal government wants us to say no to college for poor people. The mayor of the city of New York formally doesn't want them. I think that the state of New York and the legislature has to take the lead and say, we know we have a mismatch between our skills of low-income people and the jobs out there, and it's part of our job to help people move out of poverty to get them the skills that are going to make them attractive to the private sector.
Amen.
Well, thank you both. Welfare reform must be more than cutting a benefits check and mandating that everyone work. It is the job of the legislature to provide a reasonable yet compassionate path for the poor to move from welfare to work. To do this, the legislature faces its greatest challenge in years. The choices our elected officials make will directly affect the state's 2.8 million welfare recipients and the rest of us for years to come. This is David R. Jones for the Urban Agenda. Thank you for joining us.
To comment on the Urban Agenda or for more information on CSS, contact Community Service Society of New York, 105 East 22nd Street, New York, New York, 10010. Area code 212-254-8900.